In a tense courtroom, murmurs ripple through the audience as a tall man, clad in a sharp black suit, steps forward, the cold metal of handcuffs biting into his wrists. The arresting officer, occupying a distant corner of the room, wears a confident smirk, convinced that today marks the beginning of this suspect's downfall. However, the moment the judge's eyes scan the paperwork before her, the officer's arrogance swiftly evaporates, replaced by a wave of dread. Silence envelops the room, the atmosphere tinged with suspense as everyone wonders about the identity of the man standing before them. Earlier that day, Leon Davis's morning began in a quaint suburban neighborhood, a place where greetings are exchanged but lives remain largely unconnected. At 55, Leon, a tall African-American man, moved through his world radiating quiet confidence. His destination was the courthouse, and as dawn broke, briefcase in hand, he couldn't help but notice an elderly woman struggling with her grocery bags, desperate to hoist them onto a bus bench. Without a second thought, Leon set down his own items, stepped closer, and gently lifted the heavy burden from her shaking hands. "Thank you, son," she murmured, her eyes shimmering with relief. Leon felt warmth wash over him. Even in small encounters, he understood the power of kindness and community. Just then, a police cruiser rolled by. Initially indifferent, he soon felt a glare piercing through him. The officer, a white man in his 30s, scrutinized him with an unsettling intensity that made Leon's instincts prick. While he straightened his suit jacket, attempting to project calmness, an unsettling feeling unfurled within him. The cruiser slowed to a stop, and the officer exited, hand poised on his holster. "You there! Hold up!" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the crisp morning air. Bystanders exchanged anxious glances, but quickly averted their eyes, unwilling to engage. Leon's heart raced inexplicably. He was not breaking any law. He merely stood there, helpless, before an accusation he couldn't comprehend. "This is absurd," he thought, swallowing a wave of indignation. "I've done nothing but help a neighbor." The officer approached, demanding identification. Despite Leon's compliant demeanor, the officer escalated the encounter, hurling thinly veiled accusations of loitering and theft. Words that were both vague and familiar rang through Leon's mind, an all too common language of racial profiling. In tense moments that followed, the elderly woman tried to plead on his behalf, but the officer barked back, "Ma'am, step aside, I'm handling this." Leon's frustration simmered. Humiliation coursed through him as a crowd began to gather, faces etched with fear and curiosity. He reminded himself to stay calm. He had faced this sort of prejudice before, and he knew patience was his strongest asset. However, the officer had already made up his mind. He must think Leon was hiding something. Before he knew it, Leon found himself forcibly turned against the cruiser, an iron grip twisting his arm painfully. The chilling morning air juxtaposed against his mounting anger, yet years of navigating subtle discrimination guided him to remain silent. This moment was bigger than a simple misunderstanding. What followed was a cascade of events that would change everything. Handcuffed and publicly displayed, Leon was taken straight to the police station. Although the surroundings were familiar, the atmosphere changed drastically. He was unceremoniously seated on a cold, hard bench, the cuffs digging into his wrists as the arresting officer strutted around, recounting tales of people who deserved swift justice. Leon attempted to explain his situation, citing an important meeting at the courthouse, but the officer scoffed dismissively, responding in sarcasm, "Yeah, sure, and I'm the president." With a flourish, he tossed Leon's briefcase onto a desk, scattering its contents and raising Leon's ire. Thoughts raced uncontrollably. Is this really happening because I'm black? Is this officer on some sort of power trip? The frustration twisted with dark humor in his mind. What would the officer think if only he knew Leon's real identity? Eventually, a second officer, stocky and seemingly less hostile, joined the ordeal. Though not sympathetic, he was mercifully less combative. They took photos, fingerprints, and personal details, each question laced with suspicion. Leon felt dehumanized, treated not as a man who had performed a good deed that morning, but as a criminal deserving of disgrace. Rumors of his arrest spread throughout the station, curious onlookers peering around corners with hushed whispers. "He must have done something real bad," one murmured. Another speculated, "Too dressed up, probably laundering money." The absurdity of their assumptions pushed Leon's anger to the surface. His requests for a phone call went ignored for hours. By the time the officer grudgingly escorted him to a holding cell, tension had physically exhausted him. As he sat in silence, determination sparked in his chest. He remembered those who depended on him, urging him to stay sturdy. They'd realize the truth soon enough, he mused with fervor. Later that day, he learned he would face a judge the following morning. Standard procedure, they said. The arresting officer's delight was evident as he relished the prospect of witnessing Leon's downfall, muttering under his breath, "Let's see how tough you are in court." Leon met the officer's gaze unflinchingly, the years of confronting prejudice coalescing into an unyielding resolve. Part of him longed to shout the truth from the rooftops, to erase the smugness off the officer's face. But experiences had instilled in him the knowledge that timing is vital. As morning arrived, Leon was reluctantly escorted into the courthouse, handcuffed and demeaned. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation upon his entry. Some staffers recognized him, surprise evident on their faces. The arresting officer, still cocky, maintained his satisfied grin as the judge took her place, and the case was called. Then came the moment of revelation. When the judge read out the charges, resisting arrest, suspicious behavior, the frivolity seemed laughable to anyone aware of Leon's upright reputation. Gasps filled the room when it became evident who Leon truly was, the state's newly appointed chief prosecutor. The officer's face went pale, realization dawning about the colossal misjudgment he had made. With renewed dignity, Leon recounted the absurdities that had transpired, visible outrage propelling his voice. Witness statements and surveillance footage provided irrefutable proof of his innocence, and the judge, appalled by the blatant misuse of authority, called for an inquiry into the officer's conduct. As murmurs rippled through the audience, the once arrogant officer quaked under scrutiny, stammering excuses that fell flat in light of the day's disclosures. Finally, free from the shackles, Leon stepped out of the courtroom a few paces ahead of the disheartened officer. As he gathered his belongings, he walked into the sunlight outside, breathing deeply. The events could have stoked feelings of vindication or rage within him, but instead, he offered a serene nod in the face of disbelief and outrage from onlookers. He thought of those who, unlike him, never had the chance to challenge the injustice they faced. Today marked a victory that resonated beyond the courthouse walls. With a commitment to hold racial bias accountable under the law, an embodiment of justice in its truest form, Leon stepped forward, ready to confront future challenges with unwavering resolve.